So, you know how to brainstorm? You've got some motives under your belt. Now it's time to make some story things happen. It's time for conflict. So in this video, I'm going to cover, first of all, what is conflict, and then how you build it, how you brainstorm it, and then I'm going to share a few tips and a little bit of the theory behind this method. So, first of all, what is conflict? Things happening to your main character isn't necessarily conflict. Action is not necessarily conflict. This means that what can be really powerful conflict for one story can be absolutely irrelevant twaddle for another, depending on the motive. For example, here's how the exact same piece of action can be conflict for one story and not for another. So let's bring back Julie, our aspiring coffee shop owner from the last video. Julie's motive is that she is saving to open a coffee shop. And the action is that Julie's car breaks down and fixing it uses up all of her savings. This is conflict because they're connected and it makes us feel like, oh my god babe, are you okay? What about your coffee shop though? Contrast that with Julie wants to reconcile with her long lost sister, that would be her motive, and the action is Julie's car breaks down and fixing it costs all of her savings. And that's not conflict because the action is not derived from the motive. Meaning we're like, girl, who cares? Definitely not me. So what forms can conflict take? Using the word action kind of implies that it's something that the main character is doing, but it definitely doesn't have to be that. Conflict can be almost anything which hinders your character in trying to achieve their desire, their motive. So it could be an antagonist with a purposefully evil scheme, or it could just be a friend who unwittingly makes a devastating social faux pas. It can be a situation, a set of circumstances, a natural event. It could be an action of the characters, it could be a mistake of theirs that is going to come back to bite them, but it could also just be discovering a new piece of information which impacts their motive. Basically anything which creates a roadblock for the character on their road to fulfilling their motive. If you're still not completely clear on conflict, or you would like to look at some more examples, maybe some other people's descriptions of it, I'm going to link down below to some resources from Holly Lyle and Chuck Wendig, who both are really good at describing exactly what conflict is. So what is the process for building conflict? To build conflict, again, you'd use directed brainstorming, and this time you'll be using a brainstorming method applied to specific conflict questions. So, remember that write-up of your character's motives from the last video? Time to get it back out. You're going to use this alongside your conflict questions to brainstorm conflict for your story. So you take your motive or an element of your motive and you ask a conflict question. These are the conflict questions that I like to use the most. How could this fear or hate be realised in a specific instance? Or how could this desire be thwarted or stymied in a specific instance? And I'm going to get into why that last part of both of those questions is important later on. As always, this wording might not work for you. Try other things if it doesn't. Some other options might be what could get in the way of this desire? What kind of manifestation of this fear or hate would force the character to react? How could this fear or hate become a real tangible problem for this character? Brainstorming method. At the moment I am using the 5 ideas method, which you can see what that is in my first video on brainstorming, and it looks a little something like this. I actually used to be much more of a mind mapping person, but I've just found that brainstorming on my computer, I can get stuff out a lot faster, I can type a lot faster than I can write. So I open up a scrap or a workbook document on Scrivener and I just type up my ideas, numbering them as I go. And working in a linear, numbered way like this really shows you how true it is that you need to warm up. Almost every brainstorming method you use, you're gonna feel a bit like an idiot when you get started. Persevere. I find that almost always my first 4 or 5 ideas are not great and I don't end up using them. But if I keep going, then I start getting to really good stuff. You absolutely don't need to work chronologically here in terms of what you want to happen when in your story. Any idea for something that could be relevant to this motive as a conflict, throw it in there. You might end up with a few scenes that work consequentially, and that's great, but really the bulk of the ordering stuff that you're doing is going to be in the outlining phase, so don't worry about that. So once you've done all your splurging, you're going to want to write it up, separate the wheat from the chaff. And how you do this is really going to depend on what kind of format and brainstorming method you're using. If you're typing like me, you could easily just go through and delete all the bad ideas that you don't really want to use. I tend to be of the mind that I would like to see the ideas that I'm not so hot on later on, just in case there is anything interesting there that I can salvage. And so I tend to just mark the good ones. I tend to bold the number or something like that. If there's some real crap in there and you're really not worried about losing it, you can easily write up all your good ideas into a nice neat format ready to go for your effect brainstorming. Oftentimes you will start to get ideas for effects and reactions that your characters are going to have to these things happening as you're going. If you are working in a format where you can slice and dice, you can just pick those up and put them into another document where you're going to do your effects brainstorming. You maybe just want to match them to the number of the conflict so that you have that connection there. Or you can italicize or mark or highlight just to show that there's a difference here, that this is definitely effect and not conflict. If you're not sure exactly what counts as effect and what counts as conflict, don't worry, we'll cover that next, and you'll still be able to transfer that stuff over once you have a better understanding of conflict. So, tips and theory. Let's get specifical. I want to get specifical. That's really hard to sing, by the way. Like, I keep just wanting to say spifical. So, you're welcome, everyone. So, let's come back to that little part of my conflict questions that maybe seemed a bit out of place. In a specific instance. Why is this important? If you're coming up with conflicts that are too vague, that aren't specific enough, it's going to be really hard to write those scenes when you get to it. So I'm going to use an example from North of the End to show you this. So I've got a character called Deva, and for context, she's sort of like a Selkie. Her motive is that she wants more than anything to keep her freedom. The stakes are, for her personally, that she's afraid that losing her freedom will sort of dull the extraordinariness out of her, that it will make her kind of meaningless, and it will take away her greatest passion, which is exploration and seeking progress. But also that being cut off from her water will leave sailors vulnerable to storms and have other kind of natural side effects, which aren't going to be great as well. So I've got my motive, and now I'm going to brainstorm some conflict. So I'm going to ask, what could get in the way of this? And when I start brainstorming this, I'm going to get sort of vague answers, like she could be encumbered somehow, she could be tied to the land in some way. Now, how do I know this is too vague? Because I can't sit down and write that scene. Can you imagine sitting down to write that scene? She's encumbered somehow and somehow tied to her land. It's too difficult. Now, if I try brainstorming using the question, how can this fear be realised in a specific instance? I instantly get more specific answers. A man could capture her seal skin, trapping her, and force her to live on land as his wife. This is an actual scene idea. We've got the method by which she is trapped. Her seal skin has been captured, and yes, we're probably going to want to brainstorm a bit more and figure out why this man is doing this before we write the scene. But we've also got where she is forced to stay in his house as his wife in the context as well. I could sit down and write this scene now. While you're coming up with possible answers for your conflict question in your brainstorming, try and avoid the word somehow, any other words which imply vagueness, that you're not sure, that you don't know the details of it. And instead, just brainstorm a quick detail. It doesn't have to be good, it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be a quick idea that is going to make it more specific. That is how you brainstorm conflicts for individual scenes, which are the building blocks of your story. There is a place for these vaguer, more bigger picture ideas for your story. You can absolutely note these down too, but just remember that these ideas are incomplete. They're still going to have to be broken up and made specific with more brainstorming before you can incorporate them into your outline. It's fine to have a vague idea in your outline while you're still figuring things out, but you really want to have all these holes plugged and all these vague things made more specific before you start writing. What kind of ideas should I entertain while I'm brainstorming? Keep it loosey-goosey. all of them. Even stuff that might contradict elements you've already got in your story, or details, stuff that you might have to backtrack and retrofit other motives or laws or details to make it work. And you know why you can do this? Because you're planning before you start drafting. Everything is moldable in this stage. You're not tied to any of your ideas if you come up with something better. If you're only brainstorming as you go through the draft, as you're writing the story, you really have to work a lot more strictly within the limitations of the stuff you've already written, or you'll be forced to throw out work you've already done, which can be pretty painful. Working this way can really shortchange you out of some really brilliant ideas. But if you're working out the bones of your story before you start drafting, you can really go with the best idea and not the easiest one. If you think of something better which contradicts something else you've got planned for your story, change it in your outline. It's a lot easier to change it in your outline than it is to change it once you've already written the scene or the chapter or the book. But what if you've already written it? What if you're building these elements for revision and not your first draft? Maybe you've written the whole book, maybe you've just written some parts of it. But you're using this process to really beef up the weak parts of the story, redesign it, and do it the right way. Maybe you haven't even written any of your story yet, but you've already had some ideas for conflicts that you want to use. Include these in your write-up of your conflict brainstorming. You want this write-up to contain all the conflict you have that you want to use in this story, not just the stuff that you have created on the spot. Now, for one thing, even if you've got a piece of conflict that you know is really solid, you can brainstorm it a wee bit extra during this stage, and you might get it from good to amazing, transcendent. Even if it doesn't need any sprucing, even if it's the best piece of conflict you've ever done, you're going to want it in this write-up for the next stage when you're generating effect from this stuff. So that's really about it for me and conflict. As far as how much you need to brainstorm and how much you need to generate, take as long as you need to get some really good ideas. If once you get to the outlining stage, you feel like it's still a little thin and not really enough happens, you can do this process again. You can brainstorm more new conflict. And if you happen to have spontaneous ideas for conflict as you're going through other parts of this process, you can easily add them into your outline too. If you have a new conflict idea before you start transcribing your elements into your outline, then just add it to your conflict write-up, which if you have any new conflict ideas after you've already transcribed your conflict write-up into your outline, then you can just add it straight into your outline and just write a new scene card. And yeah, that's it really. I hope this was helpful for anyone, for someone out there. Please let me know, otherwise I'm just doing this for nothing. If you got anything other than a mysteriously silver headache from this video, please give me a thumbs up, it would really help me out. And don't worry, the silver headache will definitely be gone in a few weeks, months tops. So I'm Rachael Stephen, as always. I'm a novelist and a YouTuber, sometimes a woodland elf. You can check out my writing and read some free chapters of my sci-fi book State of Flux over at rachelstephen.com. Over there you can also read the first chapter of my work in progress North of the End if you're interested. And if you're new, then why don't you consider subscribing? Because apparently I'm still doing this. Look, mum! And if you don't subscribe, you're never going to hear about any of my new videos. So maybe get in on this action. I don't wanna be nothing other than I kinda need to pee, but I'm not gonna go yet. Then you can blah 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 blah. You can probably do some things on the internet or look shit up. I'm not gonna do everything for you. It's just staring at me. Sentences filmed in short increments because I have the memory of a goldfish.